Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're doing another Texas-based reaction. This one is the history of Texas in 11 minutes. So I'll be curious to know what they're going to talk about because I've been in Texas my whole life, so let's see if I learn anything new from this.
Home of the fastest road in the USA.
I already feel like this is a little bit of deja vu because I just did one the other day on traffic stuff in Texas, and we just covered 85 miles per hour being the fastest speed limit, and it's in Texas.
The largest state capitol building in the nation, and a mass bigger than any country in Europe. Texas has a history almost as large as everything in it. The history of the great state of Texas technically begins at around 9,200 BC at least. Paleo-Indians were the early inhabitants of the territory, and by the first
Okay, we're going way back, much further than I was expecting.
Paleo-Indians were the early inhabitants of the territory, and by the first AD years, Texas boasted a considerable indigenous population already. By the time the North American continent began to be colonized, there were about 6 main native cultural groups in Texas alone. This meant that the fate of the early European colonists would depend vastly on how the locals responded to their presence. The first European explorer to map the Texas Gulf Coast was Alonso Alvarez de Pineda in 1519.
Wow.
Although it wouldn't be for nearly another decade until a Spaniard actually journeyed into the North American interior, and thus Texas. This next expedition began in 1528 under the lead of Pánfilo de Narváez, but quickly turned into an utter disaster. Hurricanes and savage storms battered the expedition and sunk 2 of the fleet's ships, killing.
As I'm watching this, there's a hurricane brewing out in the Gulf right now, and I think it's going to dodge where I'm at, which is in Houston, Texas, but I do believe it's going to hit land somewhere, probably closer to Louisiana, I think, or maybe further south down in Corpus or something.
Already a good chunk of the initial 600 men. The survivors were still aimed for a landing in modern-day Tampico, Mexico, but as luck would have it, they were instead blown off course toward Florida, not far off from today's Tampa Bay. Now, Narváez opted to divide his troops into 2 groups, one on land and one still on the ships, to explore the northern coast of Florida. These expeditions were intended to meet up once more at an unspecified harbor, but yet again, the plan would fail. There was no harbor where the fleet could dock, and the 300 who had traveled by land were under siege from the local indigenous tribes, as well as from starvation and disease.
Not to mention, they were very far from Texas. But in those times, you know, you'd have no clue of knowing that.
These explorers were dying by the masses now, and only a few months later, around 90 remained.
Jeez.
Conditions were no better than thus far, however.
So he started with 600, ended up with 90. There's no idea how many of these ones in Florida survived, if any of them survived. Wow.
And when the final group of explorers were swept onto Galveston Island, they were swiftly abducted by the natives, and more would continue to succumb to disease, starvation, and now the harsh conditions of their new situation. 8 years later, 90 became 4. Alvar.
Wow, that is insane. Down to just 4.
Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, Andrés Dorantes de Carranza and his slave Estevanico, and Alonso del Castillo Maldonado were the only remaining members of Narváez's journey. The final survivors attempted on their own to explore what they could of the modern southwestern portion of the United States and the very top of Mexico, but they would soon join ranks with a group of slave catchers they found in Sinaloa in 1536. Finally, the expedition would reach Mexico City, and eventually the few survivors left returned to their Spanish homes. The French, however, were no less interested than Spain. While the Spaniards failed to follow up their early expeditions with the establishment of any real settlements, the French managed to do it without even intending to. It all started in the late 1600s, when a French nobleman by the name of Robert Cavalier de la Salle decided to explore along the Mississippi River with the purpose of finding a way to create a better buffer between France's North American territories and those belonging to Spain. Stumbling across the Gulf of Mexico, La Salle would soon claim the whole of the Mississippi River Valley for France. After returning to France, he then attempted to convince the king to...
Which is how a lot of the French probably ended up in Louisiana. I mean, I know some of this, obviously. Very much of the Louisiana culture is French, and that's kind of like where Creole comes from.
Set up a settlement at the mouth of the Mississippi to help fend off the nearby Spaniards, in addition to trying to convert more of the indigenous population to French Christianity. When King Louis XIV finally gave his approval, La Salle was sent back to begin the colony. Navigational faults would eventually lead La Salle to instead create a settlement further west off the coast of Mexico, but this colony would scarcely survive 3 years before finally succumbing to incursions from the natives, disease, and other difficulties. The Spanish would soon hear of the French colony nonetheless, and decided that they should remove this thorn which has been thrust into the heart of America. However, the Karankawa and disease had already done so for them. Realizing the collapse of France's settlement and the possibilities now to found a Spanish one, Alonso de Leon was sent off to first establish a mission.
What year is it by now? Did I miss that somewhere? Did he mention a year recently?
In eastern Texas in 1690. This launched a period of on-off interest in Texas by Spain, as clashes with the natives seemed to continuously dissuade the Spaniards from doing much more. Real efforts appeared to only come in the early 18th century, after a Franciscan missionary attempted to seek support from the French for establishing new missions in Texas. Spain would almost immediately move to reoccupy the territory and keep the French out, which they did fairly well. At least, they were better at defending themselves from the French than from the local indigenous. Though still at odds with various local tribes, in 1762, Spain was finally able to convince the French to relinquish all claims to the Texas territory at the end of the 7 Years' War. The Mexican War of Independence would secure much of Spain's former North American colonies as the new state of Mexico in 1821. Texas would be part of this infant.
You can finally start to see a little bit more of the shape of Texas right here, because that's where Oklahoma is, and goes down to about right in here. For a minute there, it was kind of hard to even tell where. I mean, I could see this part of it, but it was so blended you could barely tell.
Country, and the Mexican government quickly blasted open the door for immigration as they hoped to bring in more settlers to counteract the effects of the angry natives. But with the growing population also came growing unrest, and by 1836, a new Texas government was formed, and a declaration of independence from Mexico followed. The new Republic of Texas would host the infamous Battle of Alamo in short order, a bloody massacre of Texas defenders that lit a passion under many Texans who were now even more determined to fight the Mexicans. The Texas Revolution subsequently would be successful in the end, although the independence fighters opposing what they saw as the tyrannical rule of Mexico soon voted in favor of becoming a part of the United States. Ironically, the latter didn't even want Texas at first. Andrew Jackson and Martin Van Buren shot down the idea initially, but pressure from Great Britain for Texas to remain sovereign frankly pushed the Americans towards annexation. Finally, in 1845, both Congresses approved the move, and Texas thus became a state of the USA. This, not surprisingly, triggered discord between America and Mexico over territorial disputes that would initiate the start of the Mexican-American War. Though, in the end, Mexico would technically receive money in exchange for the full American ownership of Texas as well as other ceded territories, there wasn't much of an option left by the time the war was over. Originally, Texas had actually laid claim to these additional ceded territories, which are now part.
Whoever did the graphics for this video did a great job. And with that being said, because I forgot to say it at the beginning, I always include the link to the original video in my video description. So if you want to watch this video again without my commentary, of course, you'll be able to find that video in my video description.
Of modern-day Colorado, Wyoming, Kansas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. But Texas would eventually relinquish these claims to the federal government with a compromise of 1850, and barely over a decade later, in a drastic turn of events, Texas chose to leave the United States entirely. With the Civil War coming ever closer, a period of panic erupted in Texas, becoming known as the Texas Troubles. There had been rumors of enslaved people suddenly starting fires throughout the state, which led to lynching mobs and a heavier push against the abolitionist beliefs of the Union. This would eventually push Texas to hold a vote concerning secession from the United States, which found a whopping 76% of Texans in favor of leaving. As a result, Texas officially seceded and instead decided to join the Confederate States of America, a drastic change from its prior pleas to be annexed. Throughout the war, Texans who even still loosely supported or wished to be part of the Union faced severe consequences for their dissension, particularly those of the German and Mexican districts, and in Cook County in particular. In the latter, over 100 Union supporters were arrested, while over 60 of those were executed. Civil War Texas was plagued with such massacres of Unionists, and even after the Emancipation Proclamation and Juneteenth marks the end of hostilities in one form, it also triggered a new wave of violence and outrage from Confederate veterans. Nevertheless, Texas would officially rejoin the United States of America on March 30th, 1870. The following phase of Texas's history marked a time of difficult reconstruction. Racial divides caused the once 90% black Republican Party in Texas to lose power to the white Democrats. This also coincided with a new movement within the Republican Party that aims to remove the freed slaves from power in the party, with all of this reflecting the overall ongoing racial conflict throughout the former Confederate state. These challenges would stretch into the 20th century as Texas struggled to stabilize itself socially within the Union. Hurricanes, drought, and the JFK assassination would additionally plague the great state of Texas over the next century.
But not any longer. Everybody wants to come to Texas. Don't hate on me for saying that, because it's just the truth. There's more people moving here than anywhere else in the country.
Making it a tough ride for Texans still.
I wish, so when I was in school, junior high, high school, and that was when we started to really learn a lot of history. And in high school, we specifically had a Texas history for I think a whole year. I wasn't really so much interested in history back then. I'm much more interested in it now, but I think my disinterest for it back then is the way it was being taught. And it was really more about just like memorizing a bunch of dates and names, but it was just very dry and boring the way it was being taught. And if this type of video existed when I was younger, I probably would have taken a little bit more interest in history. Of course, it was different times too, because when I was in junior high and high school, the internet didn't even really exist. We barely even used computers at all. So yeah, I'm sure that the youth of today is getting, hopefully, better history lessons than what we were getting when I was that age, because technology has advanced and it allows for better curriculum and maybe a more advanced approach of teaching history. So I always really, truly appreciate these types of videos, because I knew a good amount of this information, but I haven't really studied it per se. or referenced it in so long that this was like a great refresher on a lot of this information. So if you guys want to see me react to more content like this, other states, maybe other countries, anything like that, please tell me in the comments. If you have a link to a video, that's very helpful too, so I don't have to go search it. Feel free to leave me some links to some videos too if you want me to go react to them. If you're new here, I encourage you to subscribe, click the bell so you'll get notified every time I upload a new video. If you enjoyed this video, do give it a thumbs up. It does help. And I will see you guys in the next video. Oh, before I forget, I Heart Texas Gals. I also have one that says I Heart Texas Guys. That's some of my own merch. You can pick it up at themelvinshop.com. And I've got about 50 different designs overall. Not the I Heart ones, but just shirt designs and stuff. So show me some love. Go over to my shop, pick up some merch. I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.
Reacting with Melvin, it's a vibe you love. From music to fails, it's all coming from above. Food, travel, music, all in the mix. Get ready for the fun, come get your fix. Reacting with Melvin, it's a vibe you love. From music to fails, it's all coming from